Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to a very special event. Yours truly, Eric Cavanaugh, is here for a virtual round table discussion, building the Presto open source community. Folks, we have an all-star cast lined up for you today. We'll be hearing from Girish Baliga of Uber, Amit Chopra from Facebook, of course, Dipti Bokar from Ahana, and Yu Dong from Alibaba. These folks are deep inside the matrix of the open source community, folks, and very, very excited to be learning about what their take is on what's happening in the marketplace, and of course, what Presto is all about. So just a very quick opening statement from yours truly here. I've tracked the open source movement quite religiously, frankly, since 2005, when I was doing research at the Data Warehousing Institute, and I was fascinated by what the Apache Foundation had done. So back then, the Apache web server was the #1 web server in the world in terms of websites being hosted. And I thought to myself, this is really fascinating stuff. And at the time, again, this is 2005, I was thinking to myself, you know, the combination of SOA as an architectural approach, service-oriented architecture, and open source software really spells trouble for the old-fashioned closed source view of the world. And I thought to myself, this is a big deal. This is really going to fundamentally reshape how enterprise software is designed, delivered, developed, even maintained over time. This is not some small evolutionary change. This is a fundamental revolution in how software gets deployed. And it took a little bit longer than I thought, frankly, but we've gone through various iterations, lots of open source projects. And for those who aren't familiar, open source projects are typically run by committers. So you have folks who commit their time, and a lot of times you'll get competitors working on the same project, which at first can seem kind of strange, but it actually works out very well because there's a bigger cause, there's a bigger purpose in mind. Well, Presto is a fascinating project that has come out since 2012 and came out of Facebook, and then they open sourced it. And now there's a Presto Foundation. We'll talk about that on the call today. But if you think about it, my history in this business goes way back to the early days of data warehousing, when it was all about extract, transform, and load, building your warehouse, building your schemas, building your models, really understanding what the users were going to want to do with it. And the idea back then was we realized you couldn't query operational systems. An ERP system was not designed to run analytics. It's designed to run your business. And we figured out that we really had to pull data from these core systems, put it into a relational data model in a data warehouse, and then allow analysis of that data on top of the data warehouse. So you build your OLAP cubes, online analytical processing, to get faster query times. You'd optimize the architecture, optimize the schema, etc. But the point is, the data warehouse was the centralized marshaling area for data. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to the future of this industry, and that was big data. And big data came along and really threw a wrench in the works. And frankly, that's why you saw technologies like Cassandra come out of Facebook, because the big companies out of Silicon Valley realized they could not use off-the-shelf database products to do their jobs. It just couldn't happen. So they had to roll their own. And so we entered this whole new era of application development and of these data foundations, right? So this concept of a data lake came around in the big data evolution. And now what you see is you will have companies that have a data warehouse or 2 or 5. They'll have a data lake or 2 or 3. They'll have lots of different information systems that they're looking to leverage and to use, but it no longer makes sense. You can't pull all of your data into a warehouse. You can't even realistically pull up your data into a data lake and then expect good performance. So what's been happening is Presto is this federated query engine that allows you to access all these different information sources where they are and get that truly strategic view of what's going on in your business. So this is a really big deal. It's very exciting stuff. I'm very bullish on the future of open source. There have been a couple of hiccups along the way. Those in the industry know about some infighting that we saw a few years ago, and I think that has subsided and faded, and now we're all back on the same page. But there are going to be hiccups along the way for sure going forward. But the bottom line is that open source is here to stay. It has, in fact, fundamentally changed how enterprise software gets designed and deployed. And with that, let's go around the room and get some introductions from folks. So first, Girish from Uber, tell us a bit about yourself and your take on the open source movement and Presto.
Hi, Eric. Thanks a lot for that wonderful introduction of open source and of Presto. So I'm an engineering manager at Uber. I'm part of the data infrastructure team, personally responsible for Presto and Pinot, so interactive and real-time analytics. So at Uber, Presto is very widely used. As you mentioned, it powers analytics on our data lake. And by last count, I think about half the company logs into Presto at least once a month to do something that's important for their work. So clearly, this is a big deal for our team, big deal for Uber, and seeing this community thrive is personally important for me as well.
Okay, good. And moving around the room, Amit Chopra from Facebook, tell us a bit about yourself and your commitment to open source and Presto.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Amit. I'm part of the Facebook open source team, work as a developer advocate. And the role of my team is to basically go evangelize open source. We all believe in that very, very strongly. I've been in the company for about 9 months, which is pretty much the same as when we started the Presto Foundation. I, in fact, joined just a couple of weeks before the foundation was being launched and have been involved fairly intimately from day one in starting the foundation, getting it off the ground. Our focus is really on building the open source community. So I'm really excited to see how Presto is starting to take shape over the last few months, getting new members, getting new people to adopt the product, and fairly excited to continue to see the product evolve and the community grow around that. And we'll talk about more of that later during the chat.
Okay, good. And Dipti Borkar from Ahana, tell us a bit about yourself and your commitment to Presto.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for having all of us here, and great introduction. A little back of a history, a lesson going back all the way to open source and data warehousing. I'm the co-founder and chief product officer at Ahana. And in addition to that, I'm a part of the Presto Foundation, like Abed and Girish, and the chairwoman of the outreach committee. And as I got introduced to Presto, I would say late 2018, and was very much immersed in the community, building products that were integrated with Presto, meeting the community, presenting at meetups, events. And through that journey, I kind of realized that the analytical stack has changed, like, similar to what you were talking about. And data federation, which is something that has existed for a while, is coming back with a bang. And it is almost certain that there's a different architecture that's needed in this new world that we have post big data and cloud. And that's kind of how I got introduced into Presto. I've been a part of the open source community for over 10 years with my prior companies like Couchbase and Aluxio. Very, very much believe in open source. And my co-founder and friend Steven and I, he came to the same conclusion. That's how kind of Ahana began.
That's great stuff. And I think you're exactly right about the federated aspect of the world we're going into right now. And Yu Dong, last but certainly not least, of Alibaba. So excited to have Alibaba on the call today, folks. What an amazing organization, I have to say. I have heard that you folks are doing fantastic things with artificial intelligence, of course. So is Uber and Facebook. I don't want to give any false impression there. But Yu Dong, tell us a bit about yourself and what you see happening and your commitment to Presto.
Okay, thank you, Eric, for the great introduction. Yes, this is Yudong from Alibaba Group. As you may know, Alibaba is the largest cloud service provider in China and in the Asia market. And so from the very beginning of the Alibaba Cloud, we do embrace and contribute back to the open source community to build up a lot of our services on cloud. For example, databases and the big data analytics, all those services on cloud. So as to Presto, we actually leverage the Presto to several of our key products on the cloud. For example, our data lake analytics provide a service of federation analytics. As you know, actually Eric just mentioned, so we moved actually we were in the big data time, right? But now we think we are moving to the fast data era, so which requires a lot of more effort to do analytics to different data sources in a real-time manner. So our team actually on Alibaba Cloud, we have a database business group, and in our one of our tasks is to provide such a real-time service, analytics service to our customers on cloud. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good segue, as we dive into what Presto is all about, because I think you're right, fast data is going to be a hallmark of success going forward, but so is analytics. If you get right down to brass tacks, analytics drives the information economy. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And in fact, going forward in the cloud-based world, which is the new center of gravity, analytics needs to be real time, and it needs to be baked into these systems. So it's not just sort of an offline process that happens when an analyst reviews a dashboard or something like that. We will increasingly see artificial intelligence and traditional analytics actually woven into the fabric of operational systems. And that's a really, really big deal. So let's kind of go around the room and get some thoughts on Presto as an overview, what you see happening, why it's so important. And real quick, folks, the Presto Foundation, think of like the Linux Foundation, for example, or the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. These are all organizations with the same type of mission. They're trying to generate awareness. They're trying to create forums for discussion about these technologies and to really foster collaboration. I think that's the foundational key, right, is to foster collaboration, because these are very complex technologies and one person cannot figure them all out, quite frankly. And as I suggested before, that whole paradigm of closed source programming, it's still around. It's not going to go away. It's still going to be a part of the magic, if you will, for certain companies. But the foundation, it seems to me, is going to remain open source. And so let's go around the room and talk about Presto itself, how it's used, what you think about it, what are your insights, etc. So first, Girish of Uber, tell us your thoughts about why Presto is so important in the world today.
So I think this diagram that you have up there, Eric, does a wonderful job of putting in a nutshell why Presto is important and what value it adds. So as you can see, it abstracts away the user interface that analysts and data scientists use to understand the data, using tools like Superset, Jupyter, Tableau, and a bunch. Actually, at Uber, we have half of these tools available and used very heavily by our users. And that set of interfaces is cleanly abstracted away by Presto from where the data is actually stored. And at the bottom, again, you have a bunch of systems up there, and I can probably recognize at least half of them also at Uber. But Presto is the thing that ties these two things together, right? So Presto gives a single point of contact for our users using these front-end interfaces to query data on all these systems. But even more important than a single point of contact, I think, is a single abstraction layer. And by that, what I mean is that you can query data on all these data sources using a single query language, which is Presto SQL, and a single view of the data, which is basically a set of definitions within Presto, where you can take data from, let's say, Hadoop HDFS and Pinot and join them as if they were sitting in a single database, right? And Presto makes this all possible through the abstraction layers that it builds. So the really powerful power of this system comes out in some use cases that we have at Uber. So for instance, we have Pinot as a real-time analytics store, and we have Hadoop as our big data lake where we store our historical data. And through, for instance, Apache Superset, we are able to build a single dashboard, which allows our users to look at how the real-time business is doing, as well as what the historical trends are, in a single place, using a single interface, all powered by Presto through Presto SQL. So I think this highlights the incredible power that Presto is able to bring to the data analytics space. And that's why I think I'm very excited about Presto as a system and the community that has made this possible, because I've seen other kind of open source and closed source systems, and I really don't see this kind of functionality available to this extent. And I think this is largely because of the power of the Presto community, and I'm very excited to be part of this and contribute.
Yeah, those are excellent points, and I'm glad you mentioned this, again, power of federation, of being able to reach across different environments into different information sources and pull together that particular view of some aspect of your business as if it were in a single table somewhere in a database, right? To the user, who cares where it came from as long as you get the right information. And I think increasingly we're going to need to reach into many different systems in order to see what's actually happening, especially in this cloud-based universe of ours. And so Amit Chopra, I'll bring you into this as well. Could you talk about why you feel Presto is such an important aspect and why the Presto Foundation is important for really furthering the Presto DB engine and for really taking the next steps and evolving this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll build on what Girish just talked about. From an architecture perspective, Presto was designed fairly from the very early stages to have the whole notion of pluggable backends, which makes it now really, really easy to get different kind of connectors that get added. When Facebook started the project, as you rightly mentioned, tech companies had such unique large data needs that nothing commercial out of the box would work. So they ended up designing some of these systems. And from the culture of what I've seen here at Facebook, they encourage a lot of work to be done in collaboration with the community. So making this as an open source project from the very early stages was very important part of ensuring that it's not just us who's working on this. We have other people looking at the designs, contributing to us for the growth of the system as well. And that's where we have a lot of partners that we work with. Last year, as you mentioned, we kicked off the foundation. We were also trying to see who are some of the partners who have made contributions to the product. Companies like Uber, for example, with the Pinot connector. Can we work in a more open, collaborative environment under a very neutral and open governance, which is what many companies care about? This shouldn't be a one-man, one-person show. And the foundation gives us that platform to open it up beyond just saying, hey, this is just Facebook doing this thing. It's more collaborative. We have so much more engineering talent that can now start looking at this, collaborate together in an open, neutral space, and help accelerate the growth of the engine. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Okay, good. And Dipti Borkar from Ahana, tell us a bit about yourself. And I love the name Ahana, by the way. I learned on a call with you guys last week what that means, where that came from. Can you share that? Because I think it's very, very interesting. It's from Sanskrit, right? Tell us, our audience, what that means.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Ahana comes from, it's a Sanskrit word. Sanskrit is a very old ancient kind of Indian language. A lot of scriptures are written in it. And for me, I'm kind of a database geek at heart. So when I look at data federation, and kind of the image that I got in my mind as we were founding the company was an energy at the center of it, like Girish talked about. There's a Presto cluster in the middle. It's kind of the lingua franca is SQL, and there's power energy emanating from that to many different data sources, pulling data and energy back in. And the word Ahana means first rays of the sun, and it's pretty incredible to actually have a word for that. And that's kind of the background of Ahana. For me, looking at history, which kind of rhymes, it may not repeat, but it certainly rhymes. And we're looking at the third generation of data federation with Presto. Just looking at this architecture, you get a sense of how much the analytical stack has evolved, right? It used to be three databases back in the day. Over time we added column stores and maybe a few more databases, and today even this probably doesn't do justice to everything that's out there. And because of that, it's important to rethink what architecture makes sense in this world, in this new world. Because as I've talked to users, data engineers who are in the big data space, when they share about their experiences, they spend a lot of time building pipelines to copy data from one source to another, making it accessible from one source to another, whether it's from their operational system to S3 or a data warehouse, etc. 60% of their time is spent in moving data around, right? And what Presto does is it beautifully solves this problem by being able to query in place and pushing some of the core query logic, if you will, we call it push downs, to the data sources, and pull that data in memory and process it and return it back to the analyst or the technical product manager or the data-driven person at the other end trying to make a decision, right? And so that's kind of the why Presto is why now and how it's relevant today. It's very different from the previous years and 20, 30 years ago. And that's why it's so important in this new world, in this new stack. In-place querying and the ability to federate across many data sources and to be able to join across them, which is a very hard problem to do. It solves it very well.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, Dipti, because not only is it good to take advantage of these new technologies for accessing data where it lives, because you don't have to move it so much. And let's face it, the movement of large amounts of data is very painful, even though we're getting better at that too. Ideally, if you can, you want to leave the data where it lives and access it where it lives. And that's what Presto allows you to do. And also, I'd just like you to quickly comment, what we're really seeing here is the confluence of many different technological innovations from across the spectrum of the open source community, right? So being able to leverage the latest advancements allows us to deliver this kind of solution where you really can, in a very timely fashion, reach across 5, 7, 10 different environments and extract and pull back the key little bits that are necessary, having used this push down technique that you talk about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that Presto has done a great job compared with the previous iterations, right? There was Hive, which was one of the approaches that was used to query data. There's other technologies, but because Presto is based on ANSI-SQL, right? ANSI-SQL is very, very widely used, and that's one of the reasons it's also become so popular, is because you don't have to relearn or reintegrate existing products that are out there, right? They already come with standard JDBC or DBC drivers, and it just works out of the box. And so in terms of the architecture, you get access to all these data sources, and it's processed in memory, as opposed to some of previous generation technologies that were more disk-based, right? Talking about real-time and fast data. That's the other aspect that's important, which is it's an in-memory system with the ability to spill to disk, etc., for larger data sets. And the speed is important. And so whether it's human, whether it's kind of internal use cases, like at Uber, it's Facebook, it might be kind of more internal use cases where internal employees are using it. There are users and customers that I've talked to where they actually have built products, end customer products on top of Presto, and where SLAs and latencies become even more important. And so those are some of the advantages that Presto has in comparison with the other systems, and kind of has led to the popularity and the adoption of it as well.
Okay, good. And you, Dong, from Alibaba, tell us a bit about why you feel Presto is so important and why it's a big part of what you're doing over there.
Yes, I think both Garesh, me, and the deputy already talked about the data federation, right? So based on our experience, like that from both Alibaba's internal business, like e-commerce and advertisement and the local service, we use a lot of analytics. And those analytics business rely on the different type of data source. They can have transactional data, log data, and streaming data, a lot of data. And besides those conventionally structured data, we also need to process a lot of unstructured data. For example, the image data and even the audio or other multimedia unstructured data. So the Presto provide this capability for us to to enable our analytics system to process both structured and unstructured data, like JSON and even semi-structured data, like a JSON format, right? So that's amazing, because conventionally, if you some of our customers, they build up their own big data analytics system. So that means that they need to build a very complex system to have a different kind of components, and that complexity it's really challenging for them to maintain and to upgrade, and it's really hard for them. And besides the complexity of the big data systems, the learning curve, the learning cost, they have to learn the different components like Kafka, Spark, and Hadoop, all those things, right? And then they put them together. So that's really challenging for the business. And with Presto on Alibaba Cloud, we provide this all the need in one system, so they can from getting the connect to the different data sources, and then do this analytics on by putting data together, and then give them what they want. They like the recommendation or other BI or reporting. So everything can be done on this single system. So that's a big relief for our customers and even for ourselves. I think that's the value of the Presto, what Presto can provide.
Okay, good. I'm going to go ahead and push this next slide just to show the architecture here. And we have a great question from an audience member. So I'll throw it out to each of you just to comment on. First to Girish from Uber. An attendee is asking, is Presto considered data virtualization? Why or why not? What do you think, Girish?
So I think the answer to this is obviously yes and no. It's nuanced.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah, so it is not really data virtualization in the sense that you don't have things like materialized views. Although an excellent exception here is Alibaba's Analytics DB, where they've taken Presto and actually built a storage system as part of their overall offering. But Presto, as you're able to get it off of our website and run it on your system, it's primarily a compute engine, right? So you're basically querying data from storage systems in place. And as Deepti was saying, all the computation is done in memory for the most part. And so in that sense, the data is basically is what you define it in your storage systems. But the virtualization comes because Presto allows you to define these constructs called views, right? So if you are from a traditional database background, you would remember that there are these views that you can define in databases where you can specify combinations of tables in terms of like joins or other transforms, where the user sees a virtual table and under the hood, the engine is able to take your query on this virtual table and translate it on the actual physical tables and then do the computations necessary to return the results back. So in that sense, Presto definitely provides a kind of abstract virtualization, if you will, or some sort of virtual virtualization to play around with words. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Okay, yeah, Amit Chopra, what do you think about that? Data virtualization, yes, no, or yes and no?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I think it's the way you would define virtualization. I think what it's really doing is abstracting essentially, where the data is coming from. And that makes a huge difference. If you are a user, you shouldn't really have to worry about your data source. You're running queries in the same way. You're running the same query across multiple data sources in the same way. And if you consider that as virtualization, then yes, the answer is yes. But it's not a database engine. It's really a powerful query engine. To put perspective there.
Okay, good. And Dipti, Borkar, Ahana, what are your thoughts? Data virtualization, yes, no, or both?
Yeah, agree with both Girish and Amit. We need to disagree on something, guys. If you're agreeing too much. I think that it's not, I mean, the way that Presto was designed, it was designed to sit on top of data sources, right? Not be the data source or include a data source. Now, there might be optimizations where some offerings might include a data source for speed, for low latency, etc. But it's fundamentally, it is a query engine. If you look at the database stack, you strip off the top of it, which is the parser, compiler, rewrite, optimizer, and execution engine, and you put it in a separate block, right? And then you have the data stores that are the storage engines, which used to be part of the database that have been separated out. Typically data virtualization will sit on top of it. So I would say more no than yes. I would use federation more than virtualization, because you're reaching out to more sources and pulling data in. And that's really the purpose of Presto and how it was kind of initially created.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Yudong, what are your thoughts? Data virtualization, yes, no, or both?
Yeah, it really depends. Yeah. So I think for Presto, it does a very beautiful job to abstract the interface to connect to the data. Everything is perfectly defined in the connector. So for each different type of data source or a different type of data, you can easily create a new type of connector to connect to the different the data sources. So I think that part you can say you can take it as a some kind of virtualization. Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's move on to talking more about the Presto Foundation itself. And I already kind of mentioned this, but we do have the Linux Foundation, we have the Apache Foundation. There are many, many benefits that accrue from these organizations. And I even found myself referring to this technological innovation as foundational, right? So the foundation is the basis upon which you build. And I think one of the best values that comes out of these organizations is the governance. Of course, it is the governance. It's also the nurturing. It's also the sharing of ideas, the sharing of thoughts and of concepts. One of the hallmarks of open source technology in general is many eyes make few the errors, right? Bad code goes away because we can see it all. Now, there is something to be said for open source getting up to just a certain point, but that's the key, is it gets to the point where it's useful for everyone, and then you can optimize on top of that. And I think that's really one of the major points to make here, is that because, Dipti, you mentioned this yourself, right? Because it sits on top of these other sources, it is not itself a data source, it is not itself a database, it is the layer on top that allows you to reach into all these different environments. It is the layer of abstraction for querying any number of systems, right? Mm-hmm. So back to the foundation, let's kind of go around the room and talk about the value of the Presto Foundation, its vision, where it's going. Girish, what are your thoughts?
Having looked at a lot of different foundation structures, particularly in the open source space, right? One thing that really strikes me is there are usually two different dynamics going on in any kind of a community where there's open source software collaboration, right? So on the one hand, you have a lot of technical discussions, technical contributions, people trying to just make the system work. So a bunch of gathering of engineers, if you will, right? And at the same time, when you have as foundational and transformational technology as Presto at hand, there are also other considerations, right? So that may be commercial considerations, enterprise considerations, things of that nature. And oftentimes, if you have a common forum where both of these different discussions go on in the same place, that leads to all kinds of weird confusion and kind of alternate realities and people talking past each other and so forth. So I think Linux Foundation does an excellent job of disaggregating these two different discussions, right? So the way the foundation is structured, we have a governing board where there is an environment conducive for discussing about things about the direction of the project, things about engagement, things which are not technically related, but probably have an outsize or even a majority impact on the direction of the foundation and the project. And that's the governing board. And there is also, of course, a technical steering committee, which primarily focuses on the engineering aspects. And basically, the discussion there is focused on how to make the engine itself solve all the problems that are interesting in this space, rather than trying to also figure out other issues such as the community, the participants, and so forth. So this structure of having a governing board and a technical steering committee, I think is a wonderful innovation in the Linux Foundation space, and this is what really attracted at least us from Uber to go and participate and use this structure for Presto.
Yeah, and just to kind of throw this out there, folks, to our audience out there, both live and in the future at some point, think about who's on this call. We've got Uber, Facebook, Ahana, and Alibaba. We have people who are, well, as my business partner would say, at the coal face of changing how technology is managed and developed. And we are in a whole new era with these scalable architectures, these scalable platforms. This is not your grandfather's data warehouse, to say the very least. So having the involvement, having this community of experts collaborating is very, very powerful. It really helps us achieve what the Germans call Gestalt, where the sum is greater than the whole of its parts. Amit Chopra, I'll bring you in Facebook to kind of talk about the foundation. Governance and transparency, it seems to me, are the two hallmarks of success. We want to shepherd what's happening, and we want to know, and we want everyone to know what's happening. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think when Girish mentioned, that one of the key things about how Presto Foundation operates under Linux Foundation is the separation of a governing board, which is responsible for overseeing the project at large, the direction, and the technical steering committee, which is responsible for making sure that the technology moves in the right direction. A lot of people don't probably even know or realize that anybody can actually join and watch a technical steering committee meeting. That's the openness and the nature of how things are happening now, which is significantly different from many other projects and how they work. So that was one thing I definitely found quite useful, and making sure that not just like-minded contributors like Uber, Twitter's been part of the early contributors, part of the Presto Foundation as well. And we also had Alexia, who started in the early days with us. Together, I think we can work to make the product better in a more open space. And I think that openness and being inclusive to companies' organization is the key thing.
Okay, cool. And Dipti Borkar, thoughts from you on really the importance and the role of the foundation itself?
Yeah, and Girish, you have the hard job of going first. So good thing you answer most of the questions. So that's very helpful for the rest of us. In terms of the foundation, it's good to see examples, right? What else has worked and what else has been successful? Linux Foundation has many foundations under it. One of the more well-known ones is CNCF, right, with Kubernetes. And if you look back, you could there could be a vendor kind of driven open source, a company driven open source approach to a problem, or you can have a community driven approach to an open source project, and they're very different, right? They're very different approaches. As a vendor, I mean, I'm kind of on the vendor side. I've always been on the enterprise infrastructure software side of things in the open source space. And been on both sides, where it's part of a foundation as well as part of a company-driven project. And you could, as a vendor, you might want to keep everything to yourself, right? You want control over it. But the truth is that when you look at Kubernetes and you look at projects, other projects like GraphQL, Facebook has donated other projects as well beyond Presto. The benefits that you get from a broader innovation engine is helpful for everyone, not just the users, but for the vendors who are innovating on top of the core themselves, right? And it might be hard to see, and you kind of mentioned, Eric, at the beginning, that it's kind of interesting where you have multiple possibly companies that might even be competing, right? What comes out of that is better innovation, stronger engines, and it's not something that's the good news. It's not new. We're actually just following the tried and tested path, and we've seen what success looks like. And we think that Presto is so foundational that it's important to build it and build the community the right way, which is having this transparency and governance, including getting multiple vendors in. In fact, there should be multiple vendors that are supporting the project. So Presto DB kind of was the original project, and part of what the foundation backs. And that's better for everyone, right? That's actually better for everyone, because think of it. I think of the engineering teams, right? We have some of the best innovators in the industry: Facebook, Uber, Alibaba. They have the best engineers. Not every when you have mid-market companies, they can't afford to run this system on their own, right? They don't have whatever the strength of the team is, 40, 50 people at each of these companies working on this core distributed system. They can't afford talent like that. And so we think of it as all of it together, all these great minds working on it, that can then be used by hundreds of thousands, possibly, end users, engineers, developers. And that is game changing, right? That is, it is 1 + 1 is definitely not 2, it's significantly more. And I think that's the power behind Linux Foundation, Presto Foundation, and everyone working together in a transparent, neutral, multiple vendor ecosystem, all trying to march in the same direction and having debate, good debate, about the roadmap, about the technology in an open forum. So we welcome people to join the foundation. We really want to see it be successful, and that means adding additional members. Amit and I myself, we are working very closely on engaging other companies and adding other members to the foundation, and participating through our meetups, our events, as well as joining the TSC meetings, which are public as well, as Amit mentioned. And there's a significant amount of energy and positivity that comes out of the foundation. So hopefully that adds more color to what Girish and Amit have already said.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And who should join the foundation? I'll throw this question over to Yu Dong from Alibaba. Well, vendors, contributors, committers, what's the sort of spectrum of folks who should join these kinds of operations?
Oh yeah, I think that's a good question. Before answering that question, I just want to quickly add two points. The first, I'd like to thank Facebook and the project pioneers who made the great foundation of Presto. And Facebook decided to open up to transfer the governing to the foundation, right? So I think that's a great effort. And the second one is that I think for the we talked to before we joined the foundation, and we talked to the Linux Foundation people, and but at that time we know the difference between the Linux Foundation and like Apache project. So the big difference is that the Linux Foundation can provide professional management assistant effort to the foundation. That's the big difference between the Linux Foundation and the Apache project, because Apache project is most like the project has to run their project by their own, right? So there's no professional team to help. But with the Linux Foundation, it provides all kind of help, like meeting organization and project management, all those things. I think that's great. Yeah. And as to the question, yeah, I think the Linux Foundation open up to both end user, vendors, and technical individuals. Everyone who has passion in the Presto, in the technology, we are welcome them to join. And they can play different roles, like they can contribute to the code, can contribute to the future project directions. They can contribute to user case and share their experience. And there are a lot of things for people can share and to contribute to the community. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue to get into another area. in terms of developers, right? Because committers are at the core of these operations. Committers are the ones who are coding and dedicating their time. You do need management, you need marketing, you need all these other components to kind of weave together a good process and a good solution. But the committers are the ones at the coal face again, who are actually hacking out the code. So from a developer perspective who wants to get involved, what should they look for? I'll throw that over to Girish from Uber.
There are a couple of forums that the foundation supports to have developers engage and contribute to the community. So the first is, of course, the website and the GitHub and the repository. So you can basically download the code, it's free. You can take a look at the code, it's open source. And you can make modifications and contributions to the code by submitting a code request, a pull request over GitHub, right? So there is no barrier to entry there. So you do not need to be engaged with the foundation at all. You don't need to have anything to do. You just want to use the software, but you want this 1 or 2 small fixes in. You can just put that in, get it reviewed by a committer, and make that contribution. And in the next release, your changes are there, and you can just use them. And it's available for everybody else to use. So I think the GitHub, the repository, the community process is the primary means where the vast majority of developers can engage. And now, if you want to get more involved, if you want to, for instance, be involved in the technical direction, maybe you have some opinions or some use cases where deeper changes are required in the engine itself. So as Yudong was mentioning, you could get involved with the technical steering committee. So as Amit mentioned, our technical steering committee meetings are free to the public. So you're welcome to join, you're welcome to contribute your thoughts or opinions, your use cases. As you build your engagement with the community and your contributions to the code, you can even get into a committership where you're recognized as a code leader, an engineering leader in the community. And you can also be part of the technical steering committee and help drive this direction if this is something that you want to do and engage with on a more full-time basis. So in addition to these 2 venues, sorry, I'll add another quick thing. In addition to these 2 venues, I think Amit and Deepthi can talk more about this, but we also organize a lot of community events and engagements and seminars and talks, which are great ways to come and interact directly with other folks in the community.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really glad you mentioned too that you don't have to become a committer. You can just have an idea, submit it to the organization, and that can be reviewed. And again, many eyes make few the errors, right? Because especially if you're working on a project, just for what it's worth, I know from just proofreading, just being a writer, you know what you wanted to write, and so you are not the best proofreader for your writing. Right? That's why you want other people looking at your code and looking at what you've achieved to get that perspective and to get that openness. I think that's a really brilliant point. You know, we did some. Go ahead.
Eric, one thing to add to Girish is the committers do a good job of tagging some PRs as beginner, right? So if you just want to try out, you don't know where to get started, look for tags which say beginner, and might be a small bug or add a comment or update the docs, or it could be you start simple and you go from there, right? And so there's a path of becoming a contributor is kind of the first step, and then from there committership is just based on merit. The more you do, the more you develop, the more core you get. It's essentially that's the path. It's a very clear path to becoming a committer that's open, and given that it's open source, everyone can see PRs and everything that's going on in the project. So just to add on to what Girish was saying earlier.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good point too, right? And maybe Amit Chopra, do you want to kind of chime in on all that too? What are your thoughts about all that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think one of the other aspects of the foundation, we've had the governing board, we also have the technical steering committee, and then we also have this outreach group. Deepthi is the chairwoman, and I work very closely with her, given my team's focus also on community building. We started with doing a couple of in-person meetups, earlier this year, and bringing the community together. Most of them were very Bay Area centric. That's where most of our companies were, so we were largely focused there. Of recent, given all the things that have been going on with travel restrictions and inability to do in-person meetup, we actually decided to switch over to a virtual webinar kind of format. And we've been seeing a huge interest and uptake in people who are joining from so many new places at this point. One of the other things that we were doing, like one of the things we were doing in these meetups, it was mostly the talks were driven by us from the core group of companies who were deeply involved. And now we are actually encouraging and asking our end developers, people who have built solutions, who have used Presto in a more innovative way, to also come and share some of their thoughts. And that would spark, community at a completely different level. You'll see another organization has used Presto to solve a problem in a specific way. And that we hope should also spark more interest and engagement on the general, as you said, the developer side of our community, not just the contributors side of community. One more thing I'll add. The thing that Dipti mentioned on the easy open issues, the first good issues as we call them. Our team, the open source team, also runs a number of programs, not just for Presto, but for many other Facebook open source projects with my group and a group called the Developer Circles, the Facebook Developer Circles. They run a number of programs, like they're starting a Facebook, an open source immersion program where for a month, they'll have a number of people look for these getting started issues so that they get comfortable and familiar with how to start their journey into open source. So that's not very Presto specific, but again, my team focuses on some of the other products as well. So just wanted to add that.
No, that's a really good point too. And I know that Facebook and Uber both have contributed heavily, and they also have open source program offices. You might have been alluding to that, which again is another really good technique for formalizing the nature of the organization, and which that helps people. That helps people kind of move along, get involved in the first place, and then of course sort of advance their work. And I love the fact that you mentioned the concept of merit, Dipti, meritocracy. We are increasingly in a society of meritocracies, right? Whether that's in social media or in coding or in other places. And I love that because people are then rewarded by their merit, not just rewarded for who they are or where they've been, for example, or who you know, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. But it's what you do these days. And I think that's really cool. So I'll throw it over to you, Dong, from Alibaba to kind of comment on that as well.
Yes, I agree. So as a developer, so we just we not only care about the code that we develop, we also want to see the impact of the features we develop, right? So with this Presto open source, so developers can contribute, and it just not to help just one company. So it help the company all over the world, all over the world, right? So from American to Asia to Europe, like every company use Presto can benefit from the code you develop when you commit your features, your code. So that's a big achievement for developers. Yeah, and yes, and I think we also have a lot of different channels for developers to get familiar with Presto. We have Slacks, we have email list, and we have a website. A lot of channels for developer to get to the community. Yeah.
Okay, good. No, that's a really good point. And we have a couple really good questions from the audience, so I want to be sure to get to those in the time. And we're just burning through the hour here, having so much fun. I love learning from you folks. There are a couple specific questions about Presto and what it does from the attendees, so I want to throw those over to some of our speakers today. And I'll throw this one over to Dipti. Very good question about data catalogs. So how does Presto interact with data catalogs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things, we talked about earlier about how the database has been split open and there's many different parts to it. One of the core pieces of the database was the catalog. And with big data, it's kind of split out and it's its own system. Typically for file-based systems like HDFS, data lakes like S3, you now need a separate catalog. You could use either Hive Metastore or you could use AWS Glue, which is also very popular and has to be integrated with Presto. Now, Presto is a query engine, and catalogs can be distributed, and so it can talk to multiple catalogs, but that is something that the user needs to set up and integrate. Uber and Facebook and Alibaba probably have done this on their own internally. Their developers manage a Hive meta store, or multiple of them perhaps, and that it can be quite tricky. And so that's actually where Ahana comes in, is being the first company focused on PrestoDB, the open source project. We want to make it easier for developers, because while Presto, we've talked about how beautiful it is, and the goodness of it, it still can be quite tricky and hard to use for developers that are not distributed systems engineers, or PhDs, and are just building an ad tech company, right, or a travel company, or another a fintech company, and that's not kind of their core. And so with Ahana, we are working on making it easier to integrate all the components that are needed with PrestoDB, right, that sit around it, and make it easier for users and the end users. And a catalog is one of them. If you look at one of the new sandboxes that we have, and there's a simple tutorial, we've actually bundled it in so that people can get started and it's easy to use. It's an important component which exposes the metadata for the data that sits in beneath, that Presto needs access to. So the goal of integrating that, and having offerings which there's more offerings that we will be announcing shortly, will help with some of that.
Okay, good. And another good question from the audience is, an attendee is asking, how does Presto solve the issue of query load on the systems that it's accessing? Can you talk about that, maybe Girish or Amit?
I'll let Girish handle that one. He's more on the technology side of Presto. He's the best person.
Sure, I can take a crack at that. So as you deploy Presto, and as it becomes more and more popular in your organization, obviously you'll run into good problems, like lots of people want to use it, they want to run lots of queries on it, and so you run into scaling issues, right? So the way we handle those issues at Uber and Facebook is basically you can set up multiple Presto clusters. So you can basically have a bunch of clusters which can handle different kind of query loads. So as you see more and more traffic, you start seeing patterns, right? You'll see some queries need to run right away because someone's waiting at a terminal to see the results. Maybe they're using it on superset. Then there are a certain class of queries where they're like maybe ETL jobs, or maybe offline dashboards which are updated once a day, and these are more of a batch mode queries. So then you can have these different clusters which are tuned to different query characteristics and different kind of optimization points. And then you basically are able to segregate your traffic and have them run on different clusters optimized for these different query workloads. So this is kind of what we do at Uber and Facebook and so forth. We have different clusters tuned for different workloads. And the interactive queries, we make sure that they're fast, they're big, and users have little resistance, and that's how we provide a good user experience.
Okay, good. No, that's a great answer. We've got a bunch of questions coming in from the audience. I don't think we'll have time for them, but I did want to get to at least one more topic, and frankly, I'd love to do this again next week to get into some more details. I want to get philosophical with you guys, but there isn't time. There is a new project too. So there's Presto DB, there's also Presto SQL. Dipti, can you comment on that? What does that mean? Is it significant? It's a fork in the road, basically, and what does that all mean?
Yes. Amit can add more to my answer. Facebook was open source PrestoDB, I think 2013, or maybe even earlier than that. And that's been the core Presto project for a long time. Sometime last year, Presto SQL forked off, and so there's PrestoDB, which is a part of the foundation, which all of us are part of. We've been talking about, and Presto SQL is the fork that exists. The philosophies of the kind of the main project and the fork are a little bit different. We hope that we've been talking about how important it is for the community. We hope that Presto SQL can merge back in over time. It's always hard to merge back forks in, but but it's the right thing to do for the community. And that's what we've actually been working on, trying to figure out. But sometimes you have MySQL and you have MariaDB, right? And that's okay. And that's just open source. That's the beauty of open source. You can do it. It is a little bit confusing that they're the same name, very similar names. And we hope that gets resolved in the future. Amit, anything more to add to that?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, we're actively working to resolve this issue for the benefit of our community and the direction of the project. So stay tuned. Hopefully we should have resolutions soon.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And for those who don't know, what Diti just mentioned there, MySQL forking to MariaDB, that happened. Monty Udanius, who started MySQL, did that fork the day that Oracle bought Sun. I think he was sending a message there, folks. But listen, thank you to all of you out there. I hope we get to do this again. I will forward these questions to our presenters today so they can get back to you. But this is a really big deal, folks. I think we're on a path to great things. I think this layer of abstraction is exactly what we've needed so that we don't get lost in a silo here or there. Seeing the big picture, that's the magic, that's the key for the future of analytics and the future of information design and information business. So folks, thank you so much. Thanks to the folks from Ahana for organizing this. You all have been fantastic. I really appreciate your time. We'll talk to you next time, folks. We'll do it again. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.